Snow slashed through the New York night like 1,000 tiny knives, the wind howling as if the city itself were screaming. Beneath a flickering street lamp at a deserted bus stop on 34th and Lexington, Jack Sullivan stood alone, shoulders hunched against the cold, his breath puffed out in ragged clouds, dissolving into the gray swirl of falling flakes. At 47, he was a man worn thin, his dark hair streaked with gray, his face etched with lines that told stories he'd rather forget. In his hands, he gripped a tattered leather satchel, its edges fraying like his life. Inside were 6 resumes, each one a quiet plea for a job. Each one met with silence. He shifted his weight, the chill seeping through the holes in his boots, his faded denim jacket doing little to block the bite of winter. Once, he'd been a civil engineer, a husband, a yeoman, a father, maso. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of a city that had no use for him anymore. The red neon of a diner sign across the street blinked. 9. The bus was late, again. Jack's stomach growled, but he ignored it. He'd eaten half a sandwich from a dumpster that morning. It would have to do. His eyes drifted to the snow piling up around his feet, heavy and relentless, mirroring the weight in his chest. Jobless, homeless, the words rattled in his mind, each one a stone sinking him deeper. He thought of his daughter, Ellie, now 19, living with a foster family upstate. He'd signed the papers last year, his hands shaking, promising her it was temporary. "I'll get us back together," he'd whispered as she hugged him goodbye, her tears soaking his shirt. Since then, every day had been a fight to keep that promise. But tonight, standing in the cold, it felt further away than ever. Through the haze of snow, a figure emerged. She moved quickly, her heels clicking against the icy pavement, arms wrapped tight around herself. Jack glanced up, then away. She was younger, maybe mid-30s, dressed in a sleek pencil skirt and silk blouse. No coat, her auburn hair plastered to her face by the wet snow. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her breath shallow and sharp. She stopped under the same awning, a few feet from him, shivering violently. Her hands rubbed together, red and raw from the cold, but it did nothing to stop the trembling. Jack kept his eyes on the ground. Just another stranger, he told himself. Just another night. But then the wind roared again, a brutal gust that sliced through them both. She gasped, curling inward, and Jack's gaze flicked to her. Her shoulders shook, her teeth chattered, and for a moment, she looked as lost as he felt. His jacket wasn't much, threadbare, stained, the zipper broken, but it was all he had. He could keep it, stay quiet, let the cold have her. That's what most would do. But something in him stirred, a flicker of the man he used to be, the one who fixed things, who cared. Without a word, he shrugged it off. The air bit into his skin like teeth, but he stepped toward her and held it out. She flinched, startled, her green eyes wide. "You don't have to do that." She said, her voice tight but soft, almost drowned by the wind. Jack managed a faint, tired smile. "I've lost enough today. This is all I've got left to give." She stared at him, then at the jacket, hesitating. "You need it more than I do," she protested, glancing at his thin flannel shirt. He shook his head and draped it over her shoulders anyway. "Not tonight." The warmth hit her like a shock. She pulled it closer, instinctively, the faint smell of pine and old leather wrapping around her. Her shivering eased. Just a little. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Jack nodded. Crossing his arms against the cold now clawing at him, they stood there, 2 strangers in the snow, silence stretching between them as the storm raged on. After a moment, she turned to him. "What's your name?" "Sheberleg. I'm Mara. Nice to meet you." "Mara Interin. Neen." She studied him, her gaze sharp despite the cold. "You shouldn't have given me your jacket." He shrugged, a ghost of a grin tugging at his lips. "Probably not, but I couldn't let you freeze." The low growl of a bus engine cut through the night. Headlights pierced the snow as it rolled up. Brakes hissing. Mara stepped toward it, then paused. Looking back, "Do you have somewhere to go?" Jack's throat tightened. "Somewhere," he said, not mentioning the beat-up Ford pickup parked behind a warehouse on the Lower East Side. She reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and handed it to him. In case you ever need anything. He took it, slipping it into his satchel without a glance. He'd heard promises like that before. They rarely meant anything. Mara climbed onto the bus, the jacket still around her shoulders, and glanced back once more before the doors closed. Jack watched until the taillights vanished into the white, then turned and walked into the night, the cold sinking deeper into his bones. Jack trudged through the back streets, snow crunching under his boots, the city's usual chaos muffled by the storm. His truck waited where he'd left it, a rusted '99 Ford tucked behind a crumbling warehouse, its windows frosted over. He climbed in, the door creaking, and sank into the driver's seat. A nest of blankets lay across the passenger side, a flattened pillow wedged against the armrest. He pulled a metal tin from the glove box and opened it. Inside was a photo, his wife, Sarah Muserma, her brown curls framing a warm smile, and Ellie, Kaifweister, age 8, gap-toothed and giggling. Good night. Sarah, Jean-Rie, he murmured. Dunawan Thornry Surinam. Very good night. Ellie. His voice cracked, thick with exhaustion and grief. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting the memories flood in. He'd been Jack Sullivan, the guy who built bridges, literal ones, schools, libraries, homes, Shurshim. Sarah had been a nurse, quick with a laugh, even on the worst days. Ellie had her mother's spirit, bright and fearless. They'd had a small house in Queens. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. Then the diagnosis came, breast cancer. Stage 4. 9 months later, Sarah was gone. Jack quit his job to care for her, draining their savings on treatments that didn't work. The house went next, sold to cover bills. He and Ellie bounced from apartments to motels until there was nothing left but the truck. Still, he tried to keep her world steady, turned the back seat into a fort, told her stories about the stars through the cracked windshield. Every morning, he'd walk her to school, clean-shaven, pretending things were fine. Why bother? A guy at a shelter once asked. Jack had smiled. Because my kid needs to believe I've still got hope. Last fall, the state stepped in. Ellie couldn't live in a truck. They said Jack didn't fight it. He couldn't. He hugged her tight, promised he'd fix it, and watched her go. Since then, he'd been clawing his way back, job applications, odd gigs, nights spent studying building codes at the public library. Tonight, though, hope felt like a stranger. He pulled a blanket over himself, the cold glass of the window against his cheek, and thought of Mara. Her face, pale and sharp, lingered in his mind. Why had he given her the jacket? Maybe because she looked like she needed saving, and he needed to feel like he could still save someone. His eyes closed, the snow tapping softly against the roof. Mara Vance stepped into the polished lobby of her Upper West Side high-rise, the heat inside a stark contrast to the storm still raging beyond the glass doors. The doorman nodded, but she barely noticed, her heels clicking on marble as she headed for the elevator. Jack's jacket hung heavy on her shoulders. Too big, too worn, but it felt like a shield. She hadn't meant to take it, had tried to give it back, but the quiet insistence in his eyes had stopped her. Nakrononum, in her penthouse, she stood in the silence, the hum of the city distant through triple-pane windows. The place was pristine, white leather furniture, abstract art, a view that stretched to the horizon, but it felt hollow, like a museum exhibit of her life. She slid the jacket off, her fingers brushing something in the pocket. Curious, she pulled out a folded paper, yellowed and soft from years of handling. It was a child's drawing, 2 stick figures under a lopsided sun, labeled Daddy and Me, a red heart between them. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, I love you. Daddy, Ellie. Mara's breath caught. She sank onto her couch, the paper trembling in her hands. Jack wasn't just a man at a bus stop. He was a father, carrying his daughter's love like a lifeline. Her chest tightened, a pang she hadn't felt in years. She hugged the jacket close, tears prickling her eyes, sudden, unbidden. Mara hadn't cried since she was a kid, shivering on the steps of a Brooklyn church, waiting for someone to see her. That night, a stranger had, a janitor with rough hands and a gentle voice. He'd wrapped his coat around her, sat with her until dawn, and said, "You're gonna be okay, kid." She never saw him again, but that moment fueled her climb from foster care to the top of the tech world. Now, Kurno, where's Sumri? She was Mara Vance, CEO of Horizon Labs, a powerhouse at 36, untouchable until tonight. Jack's kindness cracked something open in her, a memory of who she'd been before the armor. She looked at the drawing again, then at the jacket, and let the tears fall, not for pain, but for the quiet beauty of being seen. The next morning, Mara sat in her office, a glass tower overlooking the skyline. Her coffee sat cold, untouched, darn, as she stared at Ellie's drawing. She'd barely slept, Jack's tired smile replaying in her mind. There was something about him, grief worn like a second skin, yet a spark of goodness he couldn't bury. She buzzed her assistant. Lena, Nanawana, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. I need you to find someone, Mara said, her voice steady but urgent. His name's Jack. No last name. Bus stop at 34th and Lex. Last night around 9. He gave me his jacket. Lena raised an eyebrow but nodded. This stays quiet, Mara added. Over the next few days, Horizon's resources hummed. Traffic cams caught a blurry figure in a denim jacket. Bus logs narrowed it down. A prepaid phone number surfaced from a job forum post, tied to a Jack Sullivan, former engineer. No recent records. Finally, Lena returned with a file. Jack Sullivan, she said, civil engineer until 5 years ago. Wife died. House foreclosed. Spotted sleeping in a truck near the docks. Mara flipped through the pages. An old license photo. A dusty LinkedIn. A life faded to whispers. Where is he now? She asked. South Bronx. Lena replied. Old Ford behind a warehouse. Mara stood. Take me there. An hour later, she stepped out of a black SUV, the air thick with rust and salt. The truck sat in the shadows, snow-crusted, a relic of better days. Through the windshield, she saw him, Jack, slumped in the front seat. The door groaned as he climbed out, squinting in the daylight, his face shifting from confusion to recognition. Mara Uwanarum. His voice was rough, laced with sleep and disbelief. She smiled, small but real. I am on the rain line, Jack. He glanced at his stained jeans, his unshaven jaw, embarrassment flickering in his brown eyes. What are you doing here? I came to find you, she said simply. He frowned, arms crossing. Why? Because I couldn't forget what you did. Giving your only jacket to a stranger, it's not something you just walk away from. Jack laughed, dry and bitter. You didn't need to hunt me down for that. A text would have worked. It's not about thanks, Mara said, stepping closer. Was a sexual? It's about seeing something good and not letting it disappear. They stood there, the wind whistling through the empty lot, two lives colliding in the cold. Jack's shoulders slumped, his guard cracking just enough. You came all this way for that. Yes, she said, and maybe more. 2 weeks later, Jack hauled bricks at a construction site in Brooklyn, his breath fogging in the crisp air. His flannel clung to his back, damp with sweat. But his movements were steady, deliberate. He'd landed the gig through a temp agency, hard labor, low pay, but it was something. During a break, he sat on a concrete slab, sipping water. When a shadow fell over him, he looked up, Mara, holding a steaming coffee cup, her coat sharp against the gray day. Thought you might want this, she said, handing it over. He took it, wary, the warmth seeping into his calloused hands. You're persistent, he muttered. I am, she said, sitting beside him. Come with me for an hour. I want to show you something. He hesitated, glancing at the foreman. I've got work. I cleared it, she replied. Told him you've got an interview. Jack's brows shot up. I don't do. You do now, she said, a spark in her eyes. They drove to Horizon Labs headquarters, a gleaming monolith of glass and steel. Jack shifted uncomfortably in the lobby, dwarfed by the suits and polished floors. I don't fit here, he mumbled. Mara didn't answer. Just led him to a quiet conference room with a view of the city sprawling below. She shut the door and sat across from him. This isn't about the jacket, she said, sliding a folder toward him. It's about you. He opened it, a job offer. Human impact advisor. No engineering degree required. Just his story, his perspective. Jack stared, disbelief warring with something softer. What is this, Tunshin? A role I made, Mara said. You'd sit in on meetings. Talk about people, not profits. Remind us what matters. He shook his head, incredulous. I'm a guy who sleeps in a truck. I'm not qualified. Sure, she's gonna win. You're more qualified than anyone here, she said, leaning forward. You know what it's like to lose everything and still give? That's not on a resume, it's in your bones. Jack's throat burned. He wanted to argue, to run, but her words pinned him there. Hope, raw, terrifying, flickered in his chest. And for the first time in years, he didn't push it away. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat in his truck, the job offer resting on the dashboard, its edges curling from the damp air seeping through the cracked window. The snow had stopped, leaving the world outside still and silent. But inside his head, it was chaos. His fingers traced the folder, but he couldn't bring himself to open it again. The word swam in his mind. Human Impact Advisor. A title so foreign, it might as well have been written in another language. Mara's voice echoed too, steady and sure. You're more qualified than anyone here. He wanted to believe her, but doubt clung to him like rust on the truck's frame. He'd spent years learning to expect nothing. Good things didn't happen to guys like him. Numb. They broke. They faded. They disappeared. And yet, here was this woman, this stranger, reaching into his shadow and pulling him toward light he wasn't sure he deserved. He pulled the tin from the glove box again. The photo of Sarah and Ellie staring back at him. Sarah's eyes, warm and knowing, seemed to ask what he was waiting for. Ellie's grin, frozen at 8 years old, tugged at the part of him that still ached to be her dad. He pressed his thumb against the glass, smudging the edge. What do I do? Sarah, der Rasuarnas, he whispered, his voice rough in the quiet. The answer didn't come. But the ache did, sharp and familiar. He'd lost so much, her, their home, their life, but he'd never stop fighting for Ellie. Maybe this was another fight. One he didn't know how to win yet. He shut the tin, leaned back, and closed his eyes, the folder still unopened beside him. The next morning, Jack stood outside Horizon Labs, the glass tower looming like a judgment. He'd shaved in a gas station bathroom, splashed water on his face, and pulled on his least worn flannel, but he still felt out of place. His boots scuffed the pavement as he paced, the folder tucked under his arm. He could walk away, go back to hauling bricks, sleeping in the truck, scraping by. It was safer. Why the certinus current, familiar, Sir Marcus Orn. But then he thought of Mara, the way she'd looked at him, not with pity but with something fiercer, something that made him feel human again. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside. Mara met him in the lobby, her navy coat crisp against the white marble. You came, she said, a flicker of relief in her smile. Didn't have much else going on, he replied, half joking, his voice tight with nerves. She led him to the 5th floor, a small room with a view of the East River. 3 department heads sat waiting, 2 men in suits, 1 woman in a blazer, all eyeing him with polite skepticism. Mara introduced him. This is Jack Sullivan. He's here to help us see what we've been missing. Jack shifted, feeling their stares like pinpricks. He wasn't a speaker, wasn't a suit, but Mara nodded at him. A quiet signal to start. He cleared his throat, hands fidgeting. I'm not sure what you expect from me, he began, his voice low but steady. I don't have a fancy degree or a corner office. I've spent the last few years trying to keep my head above water. Lost my wife, my house, my kid for a while. I sleep in a truck most nights, but I've learned a few things. He paused, the room silent. I've learned what it's like to be invisible, to walk into a place and know no one sees you. And I've learned that sometimes the smallest thing, like giving a stranger your jacket, can mean more than you think. The woman in the blazer leaned forward slightly, her pen still. Jack kept going. I don't know your world, profit margins, deadlines, surmenitum, all that, but I know people. I know what it's like to need someone to look at you and say, you're enough. Maybe that's what I'm here for. To remind you there's more to this than numbers. He stopped, his face warm, expecting silence or worse. But the man with gray hair nodded slowly, scribbling something. The woman smiled, faint but real. Mara's eyes shone with quiet pride. That first week was a blur. Jack didn't have an office, just a folding chair in a corner near the break room. But people found him anyway. An intern stopped by, mumbling about stress, his hands twisting a paper clip. Jack listened, then asked, when's the last time you took a walk outside? Just to breathe. The kid blinked, like it hadn't occurred to him. A developer, mid-30s, slumped in one day, her eyes red. I'm drowning, she said, Jack didn't fix it, he couldn't, but he sat with her. Said, "You're not alone in that," and watched her shoulders ease just a fraction. Word spread. Soon, managers lingered too, asking quiet questions about burnout, about purpose. Jack didn't have answers, but he had presence, and somehow, that was enough. Mara watched from her office. Sonny turned to her view of the floor, a window into the shift. The break room grew louder, not with complaints but with laughter. People lingered longer, talked more, productivity ticked up. Not from pressure but from something organic. Something human. One afternoon, she found Jack at his corner, a cup of coffee in hand, scribbling notes on a napkin. "You're changing this place," she said, leaning against the wall. "Antoine," he snorted softly. "Just talking to people. It's more than that," she insisted. "You're waking them up." Jack looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. But later, when Makata alone, he felt it. A spark he hadn't known was still there. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was mattering. Weeks turned to months. With Mara's help, Jack scraped together enough for a down payment on a tiny apartment in Astoria. A one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall. But it had a kitchen, a bed, the wam, and a door that locked. Ellie came to see it, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her dark hair pulled back. She was taller now, her face sharper, but her eyes still held that old light. They cooked pasta that first night, the sauce splattering the stove, and laughed when it burned. "You kept your promise," she said, her voice catching as she hugged him. Jack couldn't speak, just held her tight, the ache in his chest softening into something warm. Mara became a constant too. At first, it was work, meetings, brainstorming, her checking in. Then it was lunches in the cafeteria, her teasing him about his terrible coffee taste. Then weekends, coffee shops, walks along the river, quiet nights watching movies on her couch. It wasn't loud or fast, it just grew. Jack found himself smiling more, his guard slipping. Mara's edges softened too, her sharpness giving way to something gentler when she was with him. One evening, as they stood on her balcony, the city lights sprawling below, she said, "You've changed me, Jack." He shook his head. "You did that yourself." "No." She said, her hand brushing his. "You reminded me who I wanted to be." One crisp fall day, Horizon Labs buzzed with something new. The atrium glowed with warm lights. A banner reading "One Kindness Day" strung across the ceiling. Employees gathered, dressed not in suits but in sweaters and jeans. A hum of anticipation in the air. Mara took the stage, her voice clear. "A year ago, I was freezing at a bus stop, lost in more ways than one. A man I didn't know gave me his jacket. No questions, no expectations. That moment changed everything." She unveiled a glass case, Jack's denim jacket, faded and patched, framed like a relic. Below it, a plaque he couldn't get one human months second. "One small act can rewrite a life. Summerly during to one." She turned to him, standing at the edge of the crowd. "Shakri, come up here." He climbed the steps, his borrowed suit stiff but neat, the applause ringing in his ears. Mara handed him an envelope, the deed to his apartment, paid in full. "No more trucks," she said, grinning. The room cheered, but Jack held up a hand, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box, his heart hammering. "You changed my life too," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver ring. "Mara Vance, Soren Warren, is Sissin Machisorn. Will you marry me?" Her laugh broke through tears as she nodded. "Yes, Senator." The crowd roared, and Jack slipped the ring on her finger, his hands trembling but sure. They married at a community center Mara had built years ago, a squat brick building in Brooklyn called Sam's Haven, named for the janitor who'd saved her. Kids strung paper lanterns. The cake was lopsided, and Ellie stood as maid of honor, beaming. Mara's vows were simple. "You gave me a jacket, but I'm giving you my life." Jack's voice broke as he promised to be her shelter. Always. The night ended with dancing under fairy lights. The old jacket on display, a quiet testament to where it all began. Jack Sullivan didn't have much that night at the bus stop, but he gave what he could. In return, he found love, purpose, and a home, not just for himself, but for everyone he touched. Sometimes, the smallest act echoes loudest. The first snow of the next winter dusted the streets of Astoria. settling softly on the roof of Jack and Mara's little apartment. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. A small Christmas tree blinking in the corner, its branches sagging under a mix of store-bought ornaments and paper stars Ellie had made as a kid. Jack stood at the stove, stirring a pot of chili, his sleeves rolled up, a faint hum escaping his lips. Some old Springsteen tune he couldn't shake. Mara sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, but her eyes kept drifting to him, a smile tugging at her mouth. Ellie sprawled on the couch, texting, her boots kicked off, the room warm with the kind of quiet that felt earned. Jack glanced over his shoulder. "You're staring again." "Guess mine don't," he said, his tone teasing but his cheeks flushing. Mara laughed, closing her laptop. "Can't help it. You look happy." He shrugged, turning back to the pot, but the corners of his mouth lifted. "Guess I am." It was a strange thing to admit, even to himself. Happiness had been a ghost for so long, something he chased but never caught. Now, it was here, in the clatter of spoons against bowls, in Ellie's laugh as she recounted a college story, in Mara's hand brushing his when she reached for the salt. After dinner, they bundled up, Jack in a new coat Mara had insisted on buying, Mara in a scarf that kept slipping, Ellie in a beanie pulled low, and stepped outside. The snow crunched under their boots as they walked to the park, breath fogging in the crisp air. Ellie darted ahead, scooping snow into a loose ball and lobbing it at Jack. It hit his shoulder, and he feigned outrage, chasing her until they both collapsed, laughing, into a drift. Mara watched, her hands in her pockets, her heart so full it almost hurt. Later, back inside, Ellie crashed early, sprawled across the couch with a blanket. Jack and Mara sat by the tree, mugs of cocoa cooling between them. The lights cast soft shadows on her face, and he reached for her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "Never thought I'd get this," he said, his voice low, almost a confession. "What was one?" "So," she asked, tilting her head. "A night like tonight, a family, our masirna. Wes you did me." Mara squeezed his hand, her eyes bright. "You deserve it, Jack. More than you know." He didn't argue this time, just leaned in and kissed her, slow and sure, the world outside fading to nothing. At Horizon Labs, Jack's role grew roots. His corner by the break room turned into a real office, small, cluttered with books and a coffee maker that gurgled like it was on its last legs. The sign on the door read Jack Sullivan, Human Impact, scratched into a brass plate Mara had surprised him with. He didn't run meetings or crunch numbers, but he was there. A steady presence. Employees came to him with more than work woes now. Divorces, sick parents, dreams they were scared to chase. He listened, asked questions, offered no fixes, but a kind of quiet that made them feel less alone. One day, a young designer named Tim lingered after a workshop, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, setting his coffee down. "Sure, I was going to end it last spring. Everything. Life. Then you said that thing about how people don't need fixing. Just hearing it stuck with me." Tim's eyes were wet, his jaw tight. "I'm still here because of that." Jack froze, his chest constricting. He'd said those words offhand, not knowing they'd land like that. He stepped forward, put a hand on Tim's shoulder. "I'm damn glad you're here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Tim nodded, wiped his face, and left. Jack sat back down, staring at the wall, the weight of it sinking in. He'd spent years wondering if he'd ever matter again. Now, he knew. Mara noticed the change too. Jack carried himself differently, still quiet, still rough around the edges, but lighter, like a man who'd shed a shadow. At work, she saw how people gravitated to him, how his questions rippled through the company. One afternoon, she found him in his office, surrounded by sticky notes scribbled with ideas. Little things, like coffee runs for the night crew or check on the new guy. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're building something here," she said. He looked up, sheepish. "Just a scribbling." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You're building us a soul." That night, they walked home together, the city alive with horns and lights. Mara slipped her arm through his, her head resting on his shoulder as they crossed the bridge. I used to think success was all that mattered. She said, her voice soft against the wind. Now I think it's this, us, them, in, one and woman. All of it. Jack didn't reply, just pulled her closer. The warmth of her against him enough. Spring brought one kindness day again. Bigger this time. The atrium buzzed with energy. Tables lined with food. Kids from Sam's Haven running wild. A string quartet playing off-key but earnest. Mara took the stage, her voice carrying over the crowd. 2 years ago, a stranger gave me his jacket. It wasn't just warmth, it was a wake-up call. Today, we celebrate that. And the man who started it, she gestured to Jack, who stood near the back, hands in his pockets, and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The crowd cheered, and he gave a small wave, his face red. After people milled around, sharing stories. A woman from accounting told Jack how his workshop got her talking to her estranged sister again. A janitor thanked him for the extra coffee pot he'd pushed for. Each one hit him like a wave, small but steady, washing away the last of his doubt. Mara found him later, sitting on a bench outside, the jacket still framed on display nearby. She sat beside him, her hand finding his. Proud of you, she said. He shook his head. Proud of us. Summer came hot and fast. Jack and Mara took Ellie to Coney Island. A rare day off. The boardwalk smelled of salt and fried dough. The air thick with screams from the rides. Ellie dragged them to the Ferris wheel, her laughter bright as they climbed in. At the top, the city stretched out below, a jagged line against the sea. Jack looked at his daughter, then at Mara, and felt something settle in him. Peace, maybe, or something close. Your boyfriend, you're someone. Ellie caught his eye and grinned. You're stuck with us now, Dad. Good, the swords, he said, his voice thick. That's right where I want to be. Back home. They collapsed on the couch, sunburned and sandy, the TV flickering with some old movie. Mara curled into Jack's side, Ellie's head on his shoulder. He thought of that night at the bus stop. Cold, lost. Giving away his jacket because it was all he had left. He hadn't known then that it would lead here. To this, a life rebuilt, not from steel or concrete, but from something softer, stronger. Kindness had been his bridge, and it had carried him home. Years later, Jack stood in the atrium, older now, his hair more gray than dark, his hands still rough but steady. It was one kindness day again, the 10th one, and the room overflowed. Employees, volunteers, kids from Sam's Haven grown tall. Mara, her auburn hair streaked with silver, stepped to the mic. This started with a jacket, she said, her voice warm. But it's become so much more. It's a reminder that we're all we've got. She looked at Jack, her eyes shining, and he felt that old ache, not pain, but love, deep and quiet. When she finished, he joined her, the crowd parting as he walked. He didn't speak, just stood there, the jacket still in its case, a symbol of a night that rewrote them both. Someone snapped a photo. Jack and Mara, side by side, Ellie beside them. Now a teacher herself, her arm around a little girl from the center. It went viral later, shared, reposted. A story of second chances and small acts. Jack didn't see it. He didn't need to. He had the real thing, right there in front of him. A life he'd never dared dream of. Built one kind moment at a time. Fall swept into New York with a blaze of orange and gold. The leaves crunching underfoot as Jack walked Ellie down the aisle of Sam's Haven. The little brick building was packed. Mismatched chairs spilling into the courtyard. Paper lanterns swaying in the breeze. The air thick with the scent of apple cider and wood smoke. Ellie's white dress was simple, her dark hair loose, her smile so wide it lit the room. Her fiancé, a lanky guy named Ryan with a quiet laugh and a knack for fixing things, stood waiting, his tie slightly crooked. Jack's chest tightened as he handed her off, his calloused hand lingering on hers for a beat longer than planned. You're still my girl, he whispered, his voice rough. She squeezed his fingers, eyes glistening. Always ready to show us some, Dad. He stepped back, joining Mara in the front row, her hand slipping into his like it belonged there. She wore a deep green dress, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, and when she leaned into him, he felt the steady rhythm of her breathing against his shoulder. The vows were short, heartfelt, Ellie promising to laugh through the hard days, Ryan vowing to build her a life she'd never have to run from. Jack's throat burned. Memories of Sarah flickering in his mind. Her voice. Her warmth. The way she dreamed of this day for their daughter. He blinked hard, and Mara's thumb brushed his knuckles, grounding him. When the crowd cheered, he clapped too, his smile shaky but real. The reception spilled outside. Kids from the center chasing each other with sparklers. Music humming from a borrowed speaker. Jack found himself at a picnic table, a beer in hand, watching Ellie dance with Ryan under the fairy lights. Mara slid beside him, her arm looping through his. "She's happy," she said, her voice soft. "Yeah," Jack replied, his gaze fixed on his daughter. "She is. You did that. You know. Kept her steady all those years." He shook his head, a faint chuckle escaping. "She kept me steady. My later ones." Ellie pulled him onto the makeshift dance floor, her laugh bright as she spun him awkwardly to some pop song he didn't know. The crowd hooted, and Jack grinned, his boots scuffing the gravel, feeling lighter than he had in years. When the song ended, she hugged him tight, her head against his chest. "Thanks for everything. Dad, it was shorn," she said, her voice muffled. He held her close, unable to speak, the weight of her words sinking deep. Winter came sharp and fast, the city blanketed in white again. Jack and Mara spent Christmas at the apartment, Ellie and Ryan joining them. The four of them crammed around the tiny table with a turkey too big for the oven. The room rang with laughter, Ryan's terrible puns, Ellie's mock groans, Mara's dry retorts. Jack carved the bird, his hands steady, a quiet pride in the chaos he'd helped to build. After dinner, they exchanged gifts, small things. Thoughtful, Ellie gave him a leather journal, its cover embossed with Jack Sullivan, a nod to the man he'd become. Mara handed him a photo frame, him, her you, 1 year row, and Ellie at the wedding. Caught mid-laugh. "So you don't forget," she said, her eyes teasing but warm. He didn't say much, just pulled her close, the frame clutched in his hand. That night, after Ellie and Ryan left, Jack stood by the window, the snow falling slow and steady outside. Mara joined him, her reflection faint in the glass. "You okay?" she asked, her hand resting on his back. He nodded, turning to her. "Better than Deriferson, okay. Just thinking about how we got here." She smiled, small and knowing, a jacket and a bus stop. "And you went to a want ho," he added, his voice low. "Mostly you, mostly you." She kissed him then, soft and lingering, the world beyond the window fading away. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, snow piling up outside like a promise of new beginnings. Spring brought change to Horizon Labs. Jack's role had grown, less a corner office oddity, more a cornerstone. He led workshops now, not just for staff but for the community. Vets looking for work, kids from Sam's Haven dreaming bigger, single parents like he'd been. His voice, once hesitant, carried weight, each word shaped by years of hard-earned truth. One afternoon, a teenage girl from the center lingered after a session, her hoodie pulled tight, her eyes darting. "You really think I can do something?" she asked, her voice small. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I know you can. I was where you are. Thought I was done." Took one step, then another. "A to what a return of one. That's all it is." She bit her lip, nodded, and left with a spark he recognized, the same one Mara had seen in him. Mara watched it all, her office a perch above the hum of the floor. She'd built Horizon into a giant, but Jack had given it a heartbeat. "Hey, come on, Anisha." One evening, as they locked up, she stopped him in the hall. "You know, you're the best thing that's happened to this place, right?" He snorted, adjusting his bag. "You're the brains." "Maria in the room. I'm just the guy who talks too much." She grabbed his arm, turning him to face her. "You're the soul." "Jack, don't you dare downplay that." He met her gaze, saw the fire there, and nodded, a slow grin breaking through. "Guess we're a team." Then, "And Emerson never will want and always." She said, and they walked out into the dusk, the city alive around them. Summer hit with a vengeance, the heat shimmering off the pavement. Jack and Mara took a rare weekend away, a cabin upstate by a lake so still it mirrored the sky. They swam, cooked over a fire, sat on the dock with their feet dangling in the water. One night, under a blanket of stars, Jack pulled out the journal Ellie had given him. He'd started writing, bits of his story, lessons he'd learned, things he wanted to leave behind. Mara leaned against him, reading over his shoulder. You should share this, she said, her voice quiet. He tensed. It's just for me. And you, it's more than that. She pressed. People need to hear it, how you fell, how you got back up. He didn't answer right away, the water lapping softly below. But later, back in the city, he typed it up, rough, unpolished. Buena Mariam. Real. Mara sent it to a friend at a small press. And 6 months later, Winnie Warius, One Jacket, One Life hit shelves. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its way into shelters. Libraries went on over Werther's Maifersherman, word Masiramas, the hands of people who saw themselves in its pages. Letters trickled in, shaky handwriting, thanking him for showing them they weren't alone. Jack read each one, his hands trembling, the echoes of his own doubt fading with every word. Fall rolled around again, and one kindness day turned 15. The atrium was a riot of color, banners, lights. A choir from Sam's Haven singing off-key but loud. Mara took the stage, her voice steady despite the years. 15 years ago, a man gave me his jacket. He didn't know it, but he gave me a life too. She looked at Jack, now beside her, his hair nearly white, his eyes still sharp. The crowd roared, and she unveiled a new plaque. Jack Sullivan, kindness endures. So, he stepped forward, unscripted, his voice gravelly but clear. I didn't have much that night, just a jacket and a little hope. Turns out, that's enough to start something. You all made it grow. He paused, glancing at Mara, then Ellie in the front row, pregnant now, her hand on her belly. Keep giving what you've got, even when it's small. It matters. The applause shook the room, but Jack barely heard it. He felt Mara's hand in his, Ellie's smile, the weight of a life rebuilt. Later, outside, he stood alone for a moment, the old jacket still in its case, a relic of a night that changed everything. Snow began to fall, soft and slow, and he tilted his head back, letting it dust his face. He'd been lost once, but kindness, his, hers or hers, theirs had brought him home. The snow kept falling that night, a gentle curtain over the city. As Jack walked back into the atrium, the crowd had thinned. The lights dimmed, but the warmth lingered, a hum of voices and laughter echoing off the glass walls. Mara was at the center of it, talking to a group of volunteers from Sam's Haven, her hands animated, her laugh cutting through the quiet. Jack paused, leaning against a pillar, watching her. She'd aged with him, lines around her eyes now, a slight curve to her shoulders, but she still carried that fire, that sharpness softened by years of love. He felt a swell in his chest, not loud or dramatic, just steady, like the beat of a drum he'd learned to trust. Ellie found him there, her coat draped over her arm, her belly round under a loose sweater. She nudged him with her elbow. You're staring. Dad. He chuckled. Caught. Pisonamorn. Old habito. She followed his gaze to Mara, then back to him. You two are gross. You know that one for a worm. Carescent and carnosorentum. Still all mushy after. What say you? 15 years. 16, he corrected, his grin widening. And I'm allowed. When Pranayender, Ellie rolled her eyes but smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Ryan's bringing the car around. I'm wiped. This kid's already kicking me into next week. Jack glanced at her stomach, a flicker of awe in his eyes. You're going to be a hell of a mom. Learn from the best, she said, her voice softening. You and Mom and Mara too. The mention of Sarah stung. Just a little, the way it always did. A quiet ache that never fully left. But it was softer now, woven into the fabric of him rather than tearing it apart. He squeezed Ellie's shoulder, and they stood there, the snow tapping the windows, until Ryan honked outside. She hugged him tight, her breath warm against his neck. Love you, Wine. Dad of one Surinobigin. Love you too, kid, he said, his voice thick as she pulled away. Mara joined him after, her coat buttoned crooked, her cheeks flushed from the cold creeping in. Ready to go? She asked, slipping her arm through his. Yeah, Ma, he said, but he didn't move right away. His eyes lingering on the jacket in its case. She followed his gaze, her hand tightening on his arm. Still can't believe that things started all this, she murmured. Jack nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Sometimes I can't either. They walked home through the snow, the streets quiet, their footsteps muffled. The apartment welcomed them with its familiar creak, the tree still glowing in the corner. A half-empty mug of cocoa on the table. Jack shed his coat, hung it beside Mara's, and sank onto the couch. She curled into him, her head on his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat steady under her ear. "Good day," she said, her voice drowsy. "Best one yet," he replied, his fingers tracing circles on her back. And they stayed like that, the snow piling up outside, the world shrinking to just them. Jack thought of the bus stop all those years ago, cold, desperate Ukitawarn, irradiant desperate, a stranger's face in the dark. He'd given what he had, not knowing it would ripple out this far, touch this many lives. It wasn't just the jacket anymore. It was everything that came after. Winter deepened. The city locked in ice. So nine? I'd sure once, certain, but Jack and Mara kept moving. At Horizon Labs, one kindness day had sparked something permanent, a fund for community projects, spearheaded by Jack's workshops. He spent mornings at Sam's Haven now, teaching carpentry to teens, his hands guiding theirs over saws and sandpaper. One boy, Malik Shimanurm, stirring, all sharp edges and guarded eyes, stuck around longer than the rest. "Why you bother with us?" he asked one day. His voice clipped as he planed a board. Jack wiped sawdust from his hands, meeting the kid's stare. "Because I was you once, someone bothered with me. Figured I'd pay it back." Malik snorted, but his grip on the tool softened, and he kept coming back. Mara joined him sometimes, her sleeves rolled up, hammering nails beside kids who called her Miss Emmy. She'd laugh, her hair dusted with wood shavings, and Jack would watch, struck by how she fit here as easily as she did in a boardroom. One afternoon, as they cleaned up, she bumped his shoulder. "You're good at this. You know, teaching them." He shrugged, stacking planks. "Just showing them what I know." "It's more than that," she said, her tone firm. "You give them something to hold on to." He didn't argue, but her words stayed with him, sinking in slow. That night, he wrote about it in his journal. Malik's quiet focus, the weight of a hammer in a kid's hand, the way it felt to build something again. The book had taken on a life of its own. Readers sending photos of dog-eared pages, shelters using it in group talks. Jack didn't chase the attention, but he couldn't deny the pull of it, the way it connected him to strangers he'd never meet. Spring broke through with a rush of green, the air warm and restless. Ellie gave birth in April, a girl, Malikli, named for Sarah, with wide eyes and a cry that could wake the dead. Jack held her first, his hands trembling as he cradled her tiny frame, her warmth seeping into him. "Hey, Sirsturno." "Little one," he whispered, his voice cracking. Ellie watched from the hospital bed, exhausted but glowing. Ryan at her side. "You're a grandpa now," she teased, and Jack laughed, the sound rough and full. Mara stood by the window, her arms crossed, a soft smile playing on her lips. When Jack passed Lily to her, she hesitated, then took her to Simborn, holding her close. "She's perfect," Mara said, her voice hushed, and Jack saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe longing, maybe memory. They'd never had kids together, never talked about it much, but in that moment, he wondered. Later, alone in the hall, he asked, "You ever wish we'd..." She shook her head, quick but gentle. "No, we've got this, us." Ellie. "There's no want them. Now Lily. It's enough up him and Ermasonter." He nodded, pulling her into a hug, her hair tickling his chin. "More than enough," he said. Lily's arrival shifted things. Jack and Mara babysat often, the apartment filling with bottles and tiny socks. Ellie and Ryan dropping by for dinners that stretched late. Jack built a crib in his spare time, sanding it smooth in the Haven's workshop. Malik helping with the finish. "For your grandkid." "One in a one," the boy asked, brushing stain onto the wood. "Yeri, son," Jack said, grinning. "Gotta make it sturdy. She's already a handful." Malik smirked. "You're all right. Old man, Duranakina surrender is some." Summer blazed in, the city sticky with heat. Jack and Mara took Lily to the park one sweltering afternoon, her stroller bumping over the paths, her babbling a constant hum. They sat on a bench, Jack feeding her bits of mashed banana, Mara fanning herself with a magazine. "We're too old for this," she groaned, but her laugh betrayed her. "Speak for yourself." Jack shot back, wiping Lily's chin. "I'm in my prime," she snorted, leaning into him. "Prime of what? Diaper duty." They stayed until dusk, the sky bruising purple. Lily asleep in Mara's arms. Walking home, Jack pushed the empty stroller, his free hand finding hers. This is it, isn't it? He said, half to himself. What? She asked, shifting Lily's weight. The good stuff, all of it. Mara stopped, turning to him, her eyes soft in the fading light. Yeah, Sharendi Jack. This is it. Fall came again, and with it, the 20th One Kindness Day. The atrium was a chaos of joy, tables of food, a mural painted by Haven kids, a stage where Ellie sang a lullaby for Lily, her voice clear and sweet. Jack and Mara stood together, older now, slower, but tethered as ever. She spoke first, her words ringing out. 20 years ago, a man gave me his jacket. It wasn't just fabric, it was a lifeline. This day, this place, Sir Nasser such, all of you, it's what grew from that. Jack took the mic after, his hands steady despite the nerves. I didn't know what I was starting back then, just wanted to help someone. Turns out, you all helped me, gave me a life I didn't think I'd get. Keep it going. All right. One small thing, it's enough. The crowd cheered. Lily clapping from Ellie's arms. And Jack stepped back, Mara's hand in his. Later, they stood by the jacket. Its denim faded to gray, the plaque worn but bright. Snow began to fall outside, and Jack felt it again, that quiet, powerful echo of a night that refused to fade. He'd given what he could, and it had carried him here, to love, to family, to a legacy stitched in kindness. Winter settled over New York like a heavy quilt, the snow piling high against the buildings, the air sharp with frost. Jack woke early one morning in late January, the apartment still dark, the glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. Mara slept beside him, her breathing soft, her arm draped across his chest. He lay there, Wasifhorn, listening to the quiet, the ache in his knees a reminder of the years piling up. 64 now. His body felt it, joints stiff from old construction injuries, hands rough as sandpaper, but his mind was sharp, alive with the life he'd built. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and padded to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled to life, its familiar hum a comfort as he watched the snow swirl outside. Lily's toys were scattered across the floor, a plastic truck, a stuffed bear left from her last visit. Jack smiled, picking them up, his fingers lingering on the bear's worn ear. She was 3 now, a tornado of energy with Ellie's grin and Sarah's stubborn streak. He'd taken to telling her stories, silly ones about talking bridges and brave little trucks, her giggles filling the gaps he'd once thought would stay empty. Yesterday, she'd climbed into his lap, her tiny hands on his face, and said, Yakinim, Grandpa, you're my best. His heart had stuttered, the weight of her words sinking deep. He set the bear on the counter, poured his coffee, and stood by the window, the steam curling up in the cold air. Mara stirred an hour later, her hair a silver tangle as she shuffled in, wrapped in a robe. You're up early, she mumbled, stealing his mug for a sip. Couldn't sleep, he said, pulling her close. Too much rattling around up here. He tapped his temple, and she smiled, resting her head against him. Good stuff or bad? Good, sir, he said, his voice low. Mostly Eurowines for 9. They stood there, the snow tapping the glass, the warmth of her against him a quiet anchor. Later, they dressed and headed to Sam's Haven, the streets slick but bustling. The center was alive with kids, some new, some grown into teens Jack had known since they were small. Malik, now 19, was there. Derman Adawan from us as Shireen, taller and broader, a tool belt slung low on his hips. He'd stuck with carpentry, apprenticing with a local crew, his hands steady in a way Jack recognized. Morning. Old man, Malik called, grinning as he hauled a stack of lumber. Morning, one, Sir Super. Kid. Jack shot back, clapping him on the shoulder. You still owe me a chair. Working on it, Malik said, his laugh easy. Mara watched, her eyes crinkling. He's turning out good, she said as they moved inside. Yeah, Jack replied, pride flickering in his chest. Here is sorry. They spent the day building, shelves for the reading room, a bench for the yard, Jack guiding, Mara pitching in, the kids a chaotic chorus around them. By afternoon, the place smelled of sawdust and hot chocolate. The snow outside a soft backdrop to the noise within. Jack sat back, wiping sweat from his brow, and caught Mara's eye across the room. She winked, and he felt that old spark, the one that hadn't dimmed. Spring arrived with a burst of rain, the city washing clean, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. Jack and Mara took Lily to the botanical gardens one weekend, her rain boots splashing in puddles, her voice a constant stream of questions. Why's the flower yellow? Grandpa, where's the rain go? Jack answered as best he could, his patience endless. Mara trailing behind with a camera, snapping shots of them crouched by tulips. Later, they sat under a tree, Lily napping against Jack's chest, her breathing slow and warm. Mara leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his. You're her whole world. You know, it came to Basarintin, she said, her voice soft. He looked down at Lily, her lashes dark against her cheeks. She's mine too, he said, his throat tight. That night, back home, Jack pulled out his journal. The pages were full now, years of scribbles, stories, and Nasimbowen, moments he didn't want to lose. He started a new one for Lily, writing about the day, the flowers, the way her laugh echoed in him. Mara found him at it, her chin resting on his shoulder. Another book, she teased. Maybe, Hamra Serentoni and Henry, he said, closing it. Just for her, she kissed his cheek, lingering. You're a softie, Jack Sullivan. Only for you three, he replied, turning to catch her lips with his. Summer blazed through, the heat relentless, the city a shimmer of asphalt and sweat. Jack and Mara retreated upstate again, the cabin a refuge of cool air and pine. Lily came too, Ellie and Ryan joining for a week, the five of them a noisy tangle of fishing rods and sunburns. Jack taught Lily to skip stones, her small hands fumbling until one skittered across the lake, her cheer piercing the quiet. Ellie watched, her arm around Ryan, and said, You're still the best dad. You know, he shrugged, deflecting, but the word stuck, warming him through the night as they sat by a fire. Lily asleep in his lap, Mara's hand in his. Back in the city, Horizon Labs hummed with change. Jack's fund had grown, now supporting trade programs across the boroughs, his workshops a lifeline for dozens. One evening, a woman approached him after a session, mid-40s, tired eyes, so was her, denasuri to warn and minds, a resume clutched tight. I heard you talk last year, she said, her voice shaky. Got me a job fixing cars. Just wanted to say thanks. Jack nodded, his chest tight. You did the work. Glad I could help. She smiled, faint but real, and left. Another ripple he hadn't seen coming. Fall marked the 25th One Kindness Day. The atrium a riot of color and sound. Banners hung high. A quilt sewn by Haven kids draped over the stage. The jacket still in its case. A quiet sentinel. Mara took the mic, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 25 years ago, a man gave me his jacket. It was small, but it was everything. This day, this life, it's what we made from it. She looked at Jack, her eyes wet, and the crowd hushed. He stepped up, older now, his back a little bent, but his gaze clear. I didn't plan this. Sure, he said, his voice gravelly. Just did what felt right. You all took it further, made it mean something. Keep doing that. All right. One thing, one moment. It's enough to start. The applause was deafening. Lily, now a whirlwind of curls, running to him. Ellie and Ryan behind her. Malik was there too, a chair in his hands. Rough-hewn but solid. Told you I'd finish it, he said, grinning. Jack laughed, clapping him on the back. The room a blur of faces and love. Later, outside, snow fell again, the city softening under it. Jack and Mara stood by the jacket, Lily between them, her mittened hand in his. Grandpa, did you really give Grandma that coat? She asked, her voice high and curious. Kiddo, he said, ruffling her hair. Best thing I ever did. Mara leaned into him, her smile soft. Best thing we ever did, she corrected, and he nodded, pulling them both close. Winter deepened, and with it came a quiet shift. Jack slowed down, fewer workshops. More time at home, his body demanding rest he'd never given it. One night, he woke to chest pain, sharp and sudden, his breath short. Mara was up in an instant, her hands steady as she called 911, her voice calm despite the fear in her eyes. The hospital was a blur, Tess. Beeps or to my son. A doctor saying mild heart attack. Caught early, Jack lay there, tubes in his arm, Mara at his side, her hand gripping his like she could will him back to strength. Ellie came with Lily, her face pale, Lily climbing onto the bed despite the nurse's frown. You okay, Grandpa? She asked, her voice small. Yeah, Tunan. 1A1. Kiamon. Sorniya Rasiran, he said, forcing a smile. Just need a tune-up. Mara stayed through the night, her head on his shoulder, whispering, You're not going anywhere. Jack Sullivan. Not yet. He squeezed her hand. Weak but sure. Not planning on it. Spring brought recovery. Slow and stubborn. Jack walked with a cane now, his steps careful. But he was there, on the porch with Lily. At Haven with Malik, beside Mara every night. The 26th One Kindness Day was quieter. Held in the Haven courtyard, Jack in a chair, Mara at his side. He didn't speak long, just said, Keep giving, it's all we've got. And the crowd smaller. Closer cheered anyway. Summer faded into fall, and Jack sat on the porch one evening. The air cool, the leaves gold. Mara joined him, a blanket over their laps. Lily's laughter drifting from inside where Ellie read her a story. We did all right, didn't we? He said, his voice soft. Mara turned to him, her eyes bright. Better than all right. Jack. We did everything. He nodded, his hand finding hers. The snow starting to fall again, a gentle echo of a night that never stopped giving. Hey there. Was Sir West, Sharon, friends? Did Jack and Mara's story touch your heart? From a single act of kindness at a snowy bus stop to a legacy that spans decades, this tale reminds us all that even in our darkest moments, a small gesture can light up the world. It's about second chances, love that grows quietly, and the power of showing up for each other. If this moved you, if it made you believe in hope, in people, in the beauty of the everyday, then stick with us. Hit that subscribe button below and join our little family at Soul Stirring Stories. We're here to bring you more tales that warm your soul, lift your spirits, and remind you what really matters. Don't miss out, subscribe now, and let's keep the kindness going together. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing.